Now we would like a couple Pershing testimonials. First, I would like to introduce Andrew McCall, who first enrolled at Truman in the fall of 2006 as a philosophy and religion major and Pershing Scholarship recipient from St. Louis, Missouri. While at Truman, Andrew became a 5-time Division II All-American in swimming, as well as captain of the swimming team, in addition to being a violinist in the University Symphony. Now that's a Pershing. Andrew also earned the distinction of being named Truman's first Rhodes Scholar. Since finishing his studies at Oxford, Andrew's interests have turned to politics. He has been working as a legislative aide in Colorado for the last year and will begin his work this fall on his PhD in political science. Andrew McCall.
Thank you, President Pano, for that introduction. And thank you, Dr. McLean, for being here and for all you've done for this university. It's still kind of, it sounds wrong to me to be introduced as Truman's first Rhodes Scholar because I've never been first at much of anything. I've got an older brother. So I was the second born, the second to start swimming, the second to start high school, the second to come to Truman, actually. I remember when I was dropping my brother off his freshman year, I was like, all right, I'm not going there. It's decided. I don't want to be second anymore. But that changed with my Pershing interview. So what I wanted to talk about today was my perspective on my experience as a younger brother. So I got lots of time to look at different first achievements in my family. And one of the things I noticed about those first achievements is that it's really easy to get hung up on that, on that set of criteria. And so the first person who crosses that line, they've accomplished something significant. And that is significant. But that person, I think, and that achievement is a lot like a rock that sits on top of a mountain. Because like that rock on that mountain, there's a whole body behind it, underneath it, supporting it, without which that achievement would not have been possible, without which that achievement, that rock, would just be an unremarkable, something sitting on the ground. And I definitely felt like that was my experience coming through Truman, that there was a mountain of support underneath me, a mountain of support that made what I did possible. And I'm confident that I am Truman's first Rhodes Scholar and that soon my accomplishments are going to be unremarkable because that rock is still there, that mountain is still there, and it's growing bigger. It's not shrinking away. It's sort of like the Rockies, a little bigger each year. So I guess from my own experience, I wanted to talk about from two different directions. There was what I learned while I was here, and then there was how I learned it. And both of them and the relationship between those two things I think are really important. Coming out of high school, sort of end of high school, I was a bright kid, certainly. They thought I was worth a Pershing scholarship. But I was also kind of angry. I was disappointed in the adults who ran the world I was living in. I was disappointed in my peers for some of their intolerance and some of their prejudices. I was disappointed in the educational system that I'd come out of for not having the flexibility to let me do exactly what I wanted to do. And having grown up a little bit, I see now why some of those barriers were there. Might have been a good idea not to let me take 4 languages and no math, but we all grow up someday, right? But I was angry. And when I came here for my interview, I wasn't going to go here. I knew that already. And I sat down to conversations. I sat down to a number of very interesting conversations. And I met Dr. Burton. And that kind of changed everything for me. Because I realized that this was a place where I wasn't going to be put into a box and shoved through a conveyor and told to sit down. It was a place where I was going to be talked to. And that's exactly what's happened, or what did happen. My memory of my education here is not of lectures, it is of conversations. Some of those conversations took place in classrooms. Some of those conversations took place after class, before class, in offices all over campus, in coffee shops. There were conversations with professors. There were conversations with staff members, maintenance staff, other students. And it never lost that feeling of being a place like home. A place like home, but unlike home, I could change. With a lot of, in a complex family situation, oftentimes we get stuck into a mold. And the difference here was that it was like a family in that I was safe, but it was unlike a family in which, in that I could change, I could learn, I could grow, and I did. A great example of that is in Dr. Burton's ancient philosophy class. So when I showed up, I was determined to study something that would be useless. I'd been told, you want to take Latin? What are you going to do with that? You need a more useful language. I'd been told, you want to take Japanese? What are you going to do with that? You need a more useful language. So I decided to study philosophy, I thought it was a good, and I was determined to not learn to do anything useful while I was here. It seemed like a reasonable undertaking, and it was going to be fun. And the reason it was going to be fun was because I was going to value it for the experience and for what I was learning, rather than for the utility it would serve later. Sort of that value of life over some perceived future benefit. And I had this moment of realization in my ancient philosophy class when I found myself arguing for why what Plato was saying was necessary for us to think about because of how important it was to the building of a community and to the functioning of a community. And I had to stop myself because I suddenly realized that Dr. Burton had led me through what I had loved, those useless philosophical questions, around to advocating for the tremendous vitality but also necessity of that useless pursuit to our society. And not only to advocating that, but caring intensely for that, for the ideas themselves, but also for their perpetuation, and for the institutions that allow those ideas to endure. Institutions like the Pershing Scholarship, institutions like Truman. And they managed to do that, Dr. Burton and a whole host of others, without me realizing it. Entirely against my will. Yeah, it still blows me away. It still blows me away. And so, yeah, that's the what I learned, and that's how they taught me. And the interplay between those two things was also significant to me because it showed me in the clearest fashion possible how people can put into practice their ideals and how they can observe them day after day. This ideal of educating a young person, of bringing them up to explore, bringing them up to learn, and bringing them up to think about their relationship to the world and how they can make that world a little better without destroying themselves in the process. And this was an example of that. Where every day my professors would show up to classes and they would teach and they would ask questions and they would have those conversations. And I think they grew out of it, but I know I did. And it was one of those, it's a gift I've been given that I can never repay. Because if the change that Dr. Burton and other professors made in my life, if I could reciprocate that, and if all of the students could reciprocate that, life doesn't get that good. If every student that they touch could repay what they'd done. So I found myself somewhat in a quandary, actually, now, because I do feel this tremendous debt, despite having no financial obligation. And it's a debt that demands repayment somehow, that calls out for being honored. And I guess this is the this is it coming along full circle. I feel like in order to honor that debt, I've come around to wanting to live in the example of Dr. Burton, in the example of Dr. Moeller, in the example of Dr. Ahmad here. These professors who decided to take what they'd been given, and rather than worrying about how they could pass it back to the people who'd given it to them, to think about how they could open it up to people who come after them, how they can position themselves and how they can change the world around them to make that more possible for the next person, to make the second female Chief Justice of the Missouri Supreme Court a little easier, to make this later recipients of the Allen Fellowship a little easier, to make the second, third, fourth Rhodes Scholars from Truman, make those a little easier to win. And Dr. McLean, in the changes you wrought in this institution and in the scholarships you established, you did create that system, that institution which perpetuates the ideals and the possibilities, ultimately, that I benefited from so much. And I can't thank you enough for that, for turning this kid who was determined to be useless into a young man who really just wants to figure out how I can help, where I can help, and never stop doing that. So thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.